Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we're tackling a really fascinating engineering challenge, the architecture and evolution of global sea-base infrastructure. Think about traditional aviation for just a second. It almost always relies on endless, heavy strips of concrete. But what happens when you need to fly somewhere where laying down a mile of flat pavement is literally out of the question? Well, that's exactly the engineering marvel we're going to explore today.
Imagine this for a second. You need to land a passenger plane or maybe deliver critical emergency supplies to a location where traditional infrastructure is just geographically impossible to build. So what happens when the concrete runs out? How do you create an aviation hub on a tiny tropical island or deep within an icy mountainous fjord? You know you can't just pave over the ocean. You need an entirely different approach to architecture and design.
So here is the fundamental contrast, right? Conventional airports rely on standard runways and highly rigid designs. They basically force nature to adapt to the infrastructure by flattening land and pouring massive amounts of concrete. But sea bases are the exact opposite. They're a form of infrastructure that inherently adapts to nature, shifting directly with the water, the geography, and the climate itself.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our geographical tour for today. We'll be covering beyond traditional airports, city and coastal connections, remote and resort destinations, amphibious hybrid bases, and finally, how all of this is shaped by geography. Let's kick things off with Section 1, Beyond Traditional Airports, Mapping the Network. And this brilliantly illustrates the macro view. Modern water aviation basically falls into 5 primary categories. You've got your floating dock bases, bustling harbor bases, luxurious resort bases, rugged wilderness bases, and highly advanced amphibious hybrid bases. Each of these forms has evolved specifically to solve the incredibly unique geographical challenges of its own environment. Moving right along to Section 2, City and Coastal Connections, focusing on urban hubs. So look at this. We've got a harbor sea base operating right smack in the middle of an active city waterfront. To pull this off, these facilities utilize specialized floating dock systems. They use floating pontoons and modular marine infrastructure that are actually designed to physically rise and fall with changing water levels and tides. Notice how the aircraft can taxi directly up to the dock. This allows passengers, cargo, and fuel to be seamlessly transferred right from these floating platforms, essentially functioning just like a regular land-based airport terminal. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer complexity of it all. Operating a passenger terminal inside a protected, busy city port is incredibly demanding. Harbor sea bases face hidden complexities and unique operational challenges that a landlocked airport literally never has to deal with. We're talking about constant marine traffic coordination, dodging ferries and private boats. Plus, there's wake turbulence from other vessels, really strict navigation restrictions, and intense congestion management. It's a highly choreographed dance between aviation and maritime operations. All right, shifting gears to Section 3, Remote and Resort Destinations, looking at the isolated extremes. Now contrast that bustling city with this, a perfect example of a rugged wilderness sea base operating in a truly remote, icy region. Think about the extreme environments of Alaska, northern Canada, or the Arctic. Out here, you definitely don't have sweeping glass terminals or fancy departure lounges. A sea base might literally just consist of a sturdy wooden dock, some vital fuel storage tanks, and a simple shoreline access point. This is aviation stripped down to its absolute bare necessities. So the crucial point we really need to take away here is perfectly captured in this quote from our sources. Despite their deceptive simplicity, these wilderness bases are, quote, critically important for isolated communities, cargo delivery, emergency medical transport, and scientific operations. For a lot of these isolated regions, these tiny docks are literal lifelines. Without them, regional survival and any connection to the outside world would be nearly impossible. But hey, isolation isn't always about freezing, rugged wilderness, right? It also includes tropical paradises. Resort bases solve the huge problem of limited conventional airports on small islands. Seaplanes provide direct, point-to-point access between islands, resorts, and coastal destinations. But unlike those purely utilitarian wilderness bases, these are specifically designed to integrate beautifully and visually with marinas and luxury waterfront hotels. It's the exact same fundamental infrastructure, just adapted for a completely different climate and purpose. Which brings us to Section 4, Amphibious Hybrid Bases, the absolute ultimate in flexibility. Let's move to and see how this builds on literally everything we've talked about so far. Check out this amphibious hybrid terminal. Notice how the conventional runways sit directly adjacent to the dedicated water operating areas and docking bays. These massive facilities are engineered to support aircraft that are fully capable of operating from both land and water simultaneously. Why are modern airports increasingly adopting these hybrid designs? It all comes down to continuous operations. It creates the ultimate fail-safe. If land conditions ever become unsuitable, say a runway is blocked or undergoing maintenance, or maybe if water conditions get too rough because of a storm, operations don't just completely shut down. The aviation hub simply pivots. They utilize the alternative operating area and keep passengers and cargo moving without missing a single beat. And finally, Section 5, Shaped by Geography, looking at environmental design. If we look at this table, it's wild to notice how drastically the environment completely dictates the architectural design. If you're building a sea base in saltwater, your primary engineering enemies are constant corrosion, massive shifting tides, and heavy wave action. Switch over to freshwater, and suddenly you've got much calmer operating conditions and vastly reduced maintenance challenges. But go way up to the Arctic, and you're fighting for ice management and need highly specialized cold weather infrastructure. Down in the tropics, well, you're designing against severe storms, salt exposure, and intense coastal weather systems. The exact same concept requires radically different engineering, based entirely on its location. Which really brings us to the core takeaway of this entire explainer. Sea bases are infrastructure shaped directly by geography itself. Unlike traditional airports that really try to dominate the landscape, water aviation actually works with it. Whether we're looking at a massive amphibious hybrid hub connecting global travelers, or a tiny wooden wilderness dock providing life-saving medical transport in the remote Arctic, this incredible flexibility allows aviation to exist virtually anywhere on Earth. So, I want to leave you with this. As global climates shift, sea levels change, and coastal cities just get more and more crowded, is water the future of adaptable aviation? It is a fascinating question to ponder. This infrastructure already inherently adapts to nature, so perhaps it's the exact blueprint we need for the future. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep looking for the structural connections, and I will see you next time.